will be recorded. Oh, what perfect timing. These sessions will be recorded and available for you to view after the fact on the YTP website. But because of that, we wanted to go ahead and just start with a recap of yesterday and a little bit of intro before we get into our content with our partners from Cornell, and I will get to introductions to you guys in just a moment. Yesterday, to recap, we talked about kind of like this bigger picture. Vocational rehabilitation is charged with and excited to be working with people age 14 through their lifespan. We're really focused on youth services, right? And so we have this really interesting point in people's lives that we get to support them and set them up for, it's the beginning. We're supporting the beginning of the rest of their life. And we also talked about the measures that VR looks at beyond just what we're used to looking at. So including in that are measurable skill gain and credential attainment. And so today we have guests from Cornell University, and they are here to help us dive deeper into what are the different post-secondary education options, just so that we can all learn and be thinking about those next steps for our students. They might be immediate next steps, or they might be longer term, later next steps, so that we can help them understand what are their possibilities, students as they leave school settings and go into adulthood. And I'm hoping most of you, but I do not want to assume, have heard about ICAP, Inclusive Career Advancement Program, which is a innovation fund grant that Oregon VR received. $18 million over 5 years to implement something pretty similar to YTP into our community colleges across the state. So there will be a career coach at the community college. It helps people navigate all of these systems in community colleges, overcome barriers that are, can be overwhelming to navigate, make sure that they're having access to the supports that they need, all through VR plan services. So our friends from Cornell are here to provide this content so that we, all of us in YTP, are hearing and learning the same information that our ICAP team is learning, so that we have common language and common understanding as we begin to build these partnerships over time. And I'm so excited that they are here. Are there any questions about yesterday before we get started? I can't see the chat. Ooh, team, who wants to monitor chat? I can monitor once.
I can, so I will, but there isn't anything in there right now.
All right. Okay, Cornell friends, are you ready? I know we're a little early, but I think we have everybody we need. Yes?
Yes, let me just go ahead and share the screen again and make sure everybody can see it.
We have Kimberly and we have Lizzie with us today from Cornell.
Can you all see that now? Is that good? Okay.
Good, Adene.
All right, and I'll let Lizzie get us started.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had their chance to grab their coffee or drinks and get started. I'm so excited to be here with you all this morning and to see the enthusiasm with everyone just getting together and getting the day started. So we're presenting today on behalf of ICAP, the Inclusive Career Advancement Program. And today we're talking about exploring those post-secondary education options. And so this is really looking at supporting individuals with disabilities on their path towards competitive integrated employment. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Lizzie, you're getting a lot of love and welcome and misuse in the chat. Just saying. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Heart emojis all over the place. It's so great to see familiar faces and new faces as well. So I feel like I'm back in Oregon. All right, thank you for that. And so our disclaimer, and so as Michelle had kind of described a bit earlier, we are a 5-year grant, or this is a 5-year grant, and it's provided by the U.S. Department of Education, the Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services, and the Rehabilitation Services Administration. And so These contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education and should not assume endorsement by the federal grant. Okay. And for any technical information needed today, this training is being recorded. Closed captioning is being provided. And for help with any technical issues, please feel free to kind of pop those in the chat, and we'll be able to get some help to you as well. I should note, oh, let's see, we just need to go back one slide. There we go. And actually, Adene, if you don't mind just going back to the one slide too, I just wanted to point out with closed captioning that if you click on the closed captioning button, that you should be able to access show subtitle, view full transcript, and any subtitle settings. Just want to make sure I get that in there. Okay, next slide. All right, so hello again. My name is Lizzie Juaniza-Saso, for those of you that I have not been able to meet. And I'm an extension associate at the Yangtan Institute at Cornell University, and I will turn it over to Adene to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Adene Karhan, also an extension associate, and I work across a few different projects, and I've seen some of you in the capacity of other trainings that we've done, but I'm happy to be here with you today on behalf of ICAP. And I will turn it back to you, Lizzie. And I apologize, there's something wonky with my arrows. So sometimes if you see the...
No worries, thank you. Okay, so these are our learning objectives today, and I believe everyone was able to get a copy of the presentation for today. So these are here for your reference, but today we're really just going to be focusing on kind of this broad overview of post-secondary options for individuals with disabilities. Again, kind of talking about, what are the different ways that we can support, talking about some different intersectional factors, and then also having a chance, hopefully, to just kind of have some interaction around, what are some of those guiding questions or action steps that you would take in supporting individuals who are exploring and, kind of getting ready to, engage on their journey towards post-secondary education options.
So Lizzie and I wanted to start our discussion today with having all of you kind of engage in an activity where we think back, we kind of put ourselves back in that period of our life where we were starting our career, or maybe some point, for some of us, it may have been earlier, right after high school that you went on for post-secondary education, but for others, it may have been later in your life, or you could think about maybe a career shift that you made. But when you were at a point in your life when you had to choose a post-secondary setting that you were going to enter, just reflect on for a moment what factors were at play in making that decision. So for example, for some of you, it may have been living close to home and that you were looking for local schools. It may have been that you were also working, and so you needed to go someplace where you could have a flexible part-time school schedule. But we're just going to give you an opportunity to either unmute or put in the chat and just share a little bit about some of the things that were most influential in helping you to make that decision.
So Adene, I can read some of those off too as they're kind of coming in through the chat. Some people are saying cost, close to home, family expectations, degree of interest, more around family expectation. I wanted to travel and go somewhere new. So having that opportunity to experience just kind of a different environment, different from, kind of what you're used to. How I was raised, most money from private university. I wanted to move away from family and travel. Again, there's some more around cost, considerations around family, social opportunities, location, convenience, started at community college to complete prerequisites. And there's some around in a state where my brother went. So there's kind of, following, the influence of other people in your family. Wanted to go away from home, knowing what program I wanted to pursue. This is great. Some more
Lots of-
around cost and location. So
Yeah, lots of variety, and it seems like there's some themes. I'm curious, for those of you that had family expectations behind it, how you view that now in terms of your role when you find yourself interacting with maybe your own children or with others that you're working with. Are you mindful of anything differently in terms of your expectations and how you are influencing the process as you're working with somebody who is at that point of making those decisions? Because I know that for a lot of us, and I wonder how much of it was generational. I wonder if it's shifted with generations. I know it still can be the case sometimes that it's really difficult sometimes to be in the position where you're working with somebody and they're your child, or you have a close attachment, and we want to stay close to them. We want them to be local, or maybe some of you, it was following a family member's footsteps. Sometimes there's businesses that run in the family and things like that, but I'd just be curious, and you can feel free to share in the chat or, share with us at some point. Has this shaped at all something about the way that you interact with people? Because I think we're also looking at that added layer of complexity of looking at individuals who also have intersectional factors related to their identity, such as having a disability that, maybe sometimes making those decisions about where to go might have additional layers of complexity. And then it can be for, if you're working with an individual who's living in poverty and they don't have the same resources, that can also influence, maybe it limits some of the options that are available. So lots of different things as we're kind of putting ourselves in the shoes of the individuals that we're serving. There are things that will be similar to our experience, and there will also be some things that might be a little different depending on the different aspects that somebody's looking at in terms of their identity when making those decisions. So thank you for participating, and we do want to, I realize it's a large group and we want to be able to share the content with you all too, but we're so thankful for the participation, and please feel free to keep that going through the chat box, even if you want to interact with one another. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Post-secondary education, just for the sake of the definition, it includes education and training by institutions of higher education, typically 2- and 4-year colleges and universities, as well as other career training and technical education programs. And that's the way it's defined by the US Department of Education. And we know this looks like this nice, neat, short list of options, but in reality, as you dig into it, you realize how many options there are and how many decisions are involved in post-secondary education. So this is a look at some data related to your state and some of the indicator 4 outcomes that are looking at, indicator 14, what's looking at individuals who are graduating from high school, what's happening afterwards. And to me, this is something that you could maybe reflect on as a group later if you haven't done that together, of just asking some reflective questions. And a good way to go about that is kind of just saying things like, I'm noticing, and sharing, maybe brainstorming the different things that you are noticing as you look at the data. And then also based on that, I'm wondering, what kinds of questions does it bring up? What things do you think, oh, I'd like to gather some more data about that, or I'd like to, I'd like to follow up and see if I'm reading this accurately, or if the hypothesis that I have in my mind is true. And sometimes you can really kind of answer those questions, and sometimes honestly it just brings up more questions. But I think that the important part is that you're even considering those things. And what I love about Oregon as a state is that you're looking at some of the disproportionality, and those are hard numbers to look at because we never want to see things that shed poor light on us. We all want to put our best foot forward, but I think to be honest about, as a nation, how we can do better in terms of post-secondary education and students with disabilities and just kind of all of those buckets, I think it takes some self-reflection, and the fact that Oregon is even gathering that data and seeing where they're at and then looking at how they can do it better is very commendable. So in comparison to other states, I think that that's significant. I do want to point out one of the big takeaways from me in reflecting on this is that it was, I think is it 28% of everyone graduating from high school is not enrolled in any post-secondary education or employment. So that was just kind of an interesting number. And my wondering was, what does that look like? This was fairly early on in terms of COVID. I think we were in the early stages at this point. So how has that changed, and what impact has COVID had on some of those numbers?
Okay, so here we're looking at some 2019 data from the US Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And so it's really looking at that correlation between the number of credentials earned and then the increased rate of employment. So we're looking at people with disabilities and people without disabilities. On the left-hand side, you can see that with less than a high school diploma, people with disabilities are at correlating with employment rates at about 9.1%. And then you see as you move towards kind of this right-hand side of the slide that as educational attainment grows, so does that employment rate. And so all the way on the right-hand side, we have individuals with a disability earning a bachelor's degree or higher. Their correlating employment rate is 28.2%. And then if we look in comparison with those without a disability earning a bachelor's degree or higher, it's at about 75.5%. And again, this is from 2019 and kind of thinking too about the impact of COVID-19 that we'll kind of get into in just a little bit too, knowing that these there may be, fluctuation in these numbers, of course, over time. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the impact of COVID-19 on college enrollment and completion. And so in fall of 2021, that enrollment in post-secondary college programs, it dropped by about 5.8%. And so thinking about community colleges, they were hit much harder by the pandemic with about a 13.2 decrease in enrollment. And so I think one of the points that we just want to kind of illustrate here is that oftentimes students may be relying on those support services that are available to them within their community colleges. And so just thinking about those support networks and different ways they may be accessing support in their communities, how that may have had an impact on different things that they're trying to navigate or different support they're needing. And so one of the most concerning trends, if we look at the right-hand side, is the increase in disproportionality. So in particular, thinking about populations of students, that disproportionality gap has grown when compared to others. And so thinking about those large gaps in enrollment or that drop in enrollment, particularly when we're thinking about individuals who are from low-income households or under-resourced communities and high schools with mostly students of color. And again, just considering that as research comes out and we're still in the midst of the pandemic, that these, more research is probably emerging too from this. All right, so this comes from a survey from about more than 30,000 students at 9 large public research universities. And they were really looking at the impact of COVID-19 and kind of these 5 areas of student well-being. And so there was a report that basically students with disabilities were feeling isolated. So about, about 57% felt that they, didn't feel like they belonged on campus. They had feelings of being in general being unsupported. They were experiencing financial hardships and food insecurity. There was some reports of increased depression, lost jobs, and then many were not expecting to increase spending in technology. So knowing that everything kind of went remote, people were having to, connect through technology. There was not that expense accounted for in terms of technology. And then there were feelings of unsafety. And so again, you know, kind of as I've been saying, this is from 2020. And so we can expect to see some more kind of emerge as we are still in the midst of this pandemic.
So as we consider post-secondary education, it's helpful to just be aware that there are two overarching federal regulations that apply at post-secondary education institutions. And basically they're ensuring that there is not discrimination against students with disabilities in post-secondary education. And it's also ensuring that there are accommodations provided. So when a student attends a post-secondary education and they're received, the institution is, or a program is receiving any type of funding from the government, then they also have to provide accommodations. And looking at some of the differences between what is provided under the IDEA in high school or K through 12 and what's provided in post-secondary education can be a helpful activity to go through with individuals, especially with youth who are coming right out of high school now, or those who recently were in high school, where they're kind of used to a certain level of support from teachers and a level of involvement from parents and other caregivers that is going to look much different in college. And so it can be helpful to help them to recognize that, for example, they will need to initiate requesting accommodations or identifying themselves as a student with a disability. And that with that will also likely involve some conversations directly with teachers, even when disability services is involved, that there will be some level of negotiation in some cases that they may not have experienced to the same degree in high school. Maybe they weren't as involved in it. Things kind of move pretty smoothly for some students who have had IEPs. The team sometimes makes decisions from one year to the next without the student always being as involved in helping to shape those decisions or in requesting certain things. So working on some of those self-determination skills and helping students to recognize the types of things that they can ask for as accommodations can be helpful. And just even things like role playing and helping them to practice those conversations. It can be difficult for students to ask for help or even sometimes to access the accommodation or the supports that are there as part of natural services, like to go and access some of the tutoring centers at school when maybe their peers aren't doing it. Can be difficult for students. They may have to go to a building on their own. They may have to find a location, which can be challenging. And then they have to be able to articulate what they want help with. So even if they're not accessing services through the disability office, they still benefit from having some conversations about how to ask to have their needs met, how to participate in some of the regular supports and services that are available universally to all students in those settings. And these may look familiar to all of you. These are some of the predictors of post-secondary education and employment success for students. And we wanted to just spend a little bit of time reflecting on these. They're pretty broad intentionally. There are lots of different activities that could fall under these. And depending on your role, the types of activities that you might conduct under these might be very different. And just recognize that sometimes a very short interaction with a student or a very brief activity can still have some benefit in building some of these skills. Some of you may be more involved more directly and maybe actually able to incorporate multiple steps over time and help students to measure progress. But others of you may have a very brief 10-minute conversation with a student, but maybe in that conversation you help them to go through the process of making a decision, or maybe you help them to recognize some aspect of disability disclosure. But we want to take a moment and just have all of you reflect and to think about, and we're going to use the annotation feature. So, that slide went away. We're going to see if everybody is able to access. Let me know. Annotate should show up if you look at the top of your screen, like if you move to the top of the toolbar. We're going to ask you to click annotate and then select a stamp. And then with that stamp, yeah.
It's the slide before this one too.
Oh, did I? Okay, I'm sorry. And again, these arrows are wonky, and for some reason it's giving me a hard time. So I apologize. I may have, oh, there we go. Okay, so
yep.
leave that there for a minute while I explain the instructions. So we're going to annotate, and what we're going to ask you to do is look at, I'm going to move to the list again in a moment of those skills, and think about which one or two of them, you can mark one or two answers. What do you see right now in terms of, you know, think of the majority of the people that you interact with around making these decisions about post-secondary education? Which do you see as the biggest skills gap? Which is something that you're seeing, if you had to pick all these that you said, yep, this is where we should put a lot of attention because it's the thing that's coming up the most. And we'll just wait and see where people put their, I love watching these pop up. It's so exciting. So I'm seeing, oh, lots of, okay. I'm seeing lots in the purple. We did recognize before that, yeah, that sometimes it's more by, you see more meaning in terms of kind of the broader categories. So what, lots on goal setting in particular. Let's see, Lizzie, where are you seeing the most? Okay, so now I'm recognizing because they're on both sides of it. So then we've got, I'm kind of counting in my head like the stars. Communication.
A lot around goal setting and planning skills in the purple box. A lot around problem solving and decision making. And it looks like, you know, there's a lot of you know, specialists on today. So that makes you know, kind of makes sense with kind of that support that's being provided directly to students as they're thinking about, you know, setting their goals for their future and planning around that. And definitely
somebody underlined accept assistance, and like, is that we're emphasizing that in particular? And I have heard that a lot of people overlook that idea that asking for help is it's actually a skill in itself, and sometimes we don't necessarily think to how to prep students for doing that. So yeah, I do think in some ways that needs to be emphasized. Wow, lots of, okay. So, so this gives you an idea of, you know, this would be an interesting exercise to go through as a team together. If you know, if you're trying to figure out where to hone in on initially with building skills in students, you might come to some consensus, like we're going to start with the purple box and focus on just these 4 things for now. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to try to figure out here how to get those to go away, which, okay, because my annotation just went away. Okay, so annotate, and I'm going to clear all drawings. Okay, so.
So, thank you. All right, so thank you for engaging in that activity with us. I think that's really helpful to see too, where you're all kind of at in terms of thinking of providing support to the students that you work with. And so as we've been talking about these career pathways, we're really talking about, you know, how is there that link between education and training with intentional student support to look at, you know, securing these credentials over time. And so you're going to hear me talk about these short-term stackable credentials that people are earning. And so really thinking about these career pathways as, you know, providing education and training. It's focusing on supporting the students along the way so that they're earning their credentials or these short-term stackable certificates. And it's really helping to prepare students for employment in high growth, high demand industry sectors. And we'll kind of have a visual that will kind of help illustrate that point in just a bit. And also provide these stepping stones to earning either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or beyond. And so there's really that opportunity to advance over time with more education. And then you'll also hear me talk about kind of these multiple entry and exit points in just a little bit. But thinking about that as a way to support that entry into the workforce with, you know, kind of this continued opportunity for career and education advancement over time. And so this bottom part of the slide is talking about, you know, this career pathways that facilitate student transitions from high school to community college, from pre-college courses to credit post-secondary programs, from community college to university employment. And so, you know, this is this is kind of talking about that facilitation from high school, but we know it's not a linear path for all people. And so having these kind of different multiple entry and exit points is really going to help individuals gain entry into the workforce. And it's through this attainment of these short-term stackable certificates that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But in terms of the use of credentials, and you can go to the next slide. There we go. So what is a credential? I'm just going to read what's on the slide. It's a verification of an individual's qualification or competence that's issued by a third party. And so really it's this umbrella term. It can be used to include educational certificates, degrees, certifications, and government issued license. So there's, you know, kind of different things that fall under this umbrella term of what a credential is. And this next slide is really just kind of illustrating what I was referring to before. So here we have the career pathway system. We have on the left-hand side, high school. So people are earning their diploma or their equivalent. Below that is adult basic education. And then there's that attainment of a credential there. As we move to the right-hand side, we have workforce training. So people are working on a certificate. There's either the university program that they're attending and learning skills there and learning through the program there that they've chosen. Community college, so a degree or certificate. And then there's this organized labor training or apprenticeship where they may be working on our certificate. And then in between, we have kind of all these different arrows, and this is really signifying that entry into the workforce. And so this is going into these kind of blue industry cluster bubbles that we're seeing. So that we have small businesses, medium firms, large anchor firms, support sector. So there's all these different kind of industry clusters. And then for, you know, whatever these personal motivations are that people are thinking, I want to earn more, I want to advance in my career, you know, I really want to kind of move forward and experience and have some success and longevity in this career that I'm, you know, attaining or working for. Then there's this light dotted line that says retraining. And that's really signifying that, you know, kind of these multiple entry points that I was talking about, where people may be going back for either earning a certificate or, you know, choosing to attend university for a higher degree. And so thinking about, you know, kind of this, you know, it's not a linear path, but that people are thinking about these different ways in which they could advance their career over time, but starting with these short-term stackable certificates as well. And there is a link there too, if people are kind of wanting to dive in a little bit more and explore some of that too.
And Lizzie, I just wanted to share, Lizzie and I have talked about, you know, about just visually kind of trying to understand this and is this more helpful or more confusing? And I think what the realization that I'm coming to is that this is very person-centered. And I think that in some ways it's really appealing because you could actually kind of have a student map where they are at any given point in time, but it shows that there's multiple ways to get to their goals so that it doesn't feel like you have to fit a square peg into a round hole. And you can say they don't have to do exactly what their peers are, and they may still end up, you know, exactly in the same place if they just may, you know, maybe they're choosing to go about it a different way. But so I do kind of like the fact that it's fluid. So if you can kind of just think of it that way of being more a broader roadmap versus trying to necessarily figure out where each arrow is going, I think that it's a really beneficial tool.
Yeah, Adene, I think some people kind of touched on that too a little bit in the chat earlier too. There was kind of that expectation that, you know, college is this only way for, you know, to move forward, or there's kind of that expectation around college. And there was a little bit about that in the chat before too, about thinking about, you know, other avenues, thinking about trade schools, thinking about these different ways that people can be really focusing on their skills and their interests and how they can move forward in achieving those goals and in kind of, you know, exploring their education and their career goals that way too. Okay. So these career pathways that, we've been talking about are these short-term stackable certificates. I know I keep saying that, but I just want to, kind of drive home that that's, really there's a shorter duration with earning these certificates. But that they're leading to jobs in these high growth fields, and it's really offering that pathway for advancement. And so I'm going to read just a couple from the left and the right hand side of different career pathways that are out there. So there's agriculture, food and natural resources, there's architecture and construction, arts, AV, technology and communication. Moving to the right hand side, there's hospitality and tourism, there's human services, information technology. So really thinking about some of these industry fields and these high growth fields that, these career pathways, they're usually less than 1 year in attaining these certificates. And it's in these high demand occupations where, again, individuals have that opportunity to advance and kind of build on these certificates over time. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so here we have an example of an accounting clerk entry level certificate, and this is from Southwestern Oregon Community College. This is Coos Bay and Brookings. And this is an example of what a career pathway in this particular field would look like. So here people would be understanding or, kind of building skills in this basic understanding of accounting principles, procedures, and kind of that accounting software. It could be earned as part of an accounting associate of applied science degree program. Again, so they're building on, it can be built on and attached to this degree program if that's something somebody chooses to do so in the future. It's a total of 14 credits. And again, the duration is less than 1 year. And so here's some examples of positions that somebody could possibly gain as employment after earning their certificate. So it could be an accounts payable clerk, an accounts receivable clerk, or data entry for a small and medium-sized business. Okay, this next one is looking at an example of a certificate for someone who wants to be a medical assistant. This is at Blue Mountain Community College in Pendleton. And so here, this is a limited entry program. And so by limited entry, that means that there's 15 spots in this particular cohort. So, that's not a lot of spots that's available in that particular program. So they do need prerequisites that are required from an accredited institution. So they need that beforehand. And then interview process. So again, thinking about what are the skills that students can be working on now to help either prepare them. I mean, interviewing skills is something that they're going to need regardless of, kind of interviewing for a program, but also for jobs in the future, but also having that as a consideration as they're looking at different options or different, fields that they want to explore. And then students graduating with a certificate in this area, there's a really strong career path to continue in these other medical fields, such as nursing or medical coding. The duration of this would be less than a year. And then another consideration is that 90% of the program is online. So again, thinking about, does the student have stable internet access? Do they have, the technology needs that they need to successfully complete this program? So, kind of other considerations to think about. And then examples of positions after completing this certificate would be a medical assistant, a certified medical assistant, or a registered medical assistant. Okay. And our third example that we have is looking at a manufacturing technician certificate, and this is at PCC, Portland Community College. So somebody would be looking at kind of this entry-level position as a machine operator, a team assembler, or a technician position. Again, this is building on skills that's needed to become a CNC turning and milling machinist. I'll be completely honest, I have no idea what that is, but it's something that people can build on again. So it's kind of this entry level position. As they get as they earn other certificates, they can kind of build on to other positions. The duration, again, it's short, so it's less than 1 year. And then here's another consideration to think about, is that it's non-financial aid eligible. And so that's something that you know, discussions kind of need to be had around, you know, what do they understand around financial aid obligations as well. And then here are some examples of different positions that somebody would gain after you know, completing this the certificate. And so a CNC machinist or computer assisted machining programmers, machine operators, and some other examples of positions there as well.
And what I noticed is that I think some of this is in response to COVID and the online learning that needed to take place, and the fact that people were not able to do tours in person as easily, is that you'll find a lot of these schools and programs now have short videos that you can access pretty easily online. And for example, you can pull it up and you can say, well, what positions are available? And sometimes watch videos that show you what are the tasks of a CNC machinist versus a machine operator. So those are all activities that you could look at the broad level of what industry I want to be in, all the way down to the more granular. Let's look at 3 different positions and compare the day-to-day life and how that matches up with the lifestyle that I want to live. So, so I think the fact that so many things are available online makes it much more accessible, and students don't have to travel if they're looking at programs that have a wide distance for them to travel. They don't have to do that any longer to get some more detailed information.
Agree. There's a lot that's out there for people to kind of access as they're thinking about career exploration. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that leads into some of what we've already been talking about a little bit. I mentioned that the graph that Lizzie showed earlier was very person-centered, in that it recognizes that students have individual preferences and interests and needs, and they may be starting and stopping at different points. I think today's student is much more fluid than they used to be. I don't know about you all, but I'm hearing of more students taking, you know, for example, students that are graduating from high school are taking gap years. Other people are maybe going back to new careers later in life. And so there's a lot of fluidity. And I think that just shows how we really need to be approaching things differently, and just say to people, you know, let's start with where you want to be, and we'll come up with some goals together, but just recognize that it's a journey, and that things may, you know, you can shape and change things as you go through, and it's going to vary with each person. So we mentioned already some of the activities, such as going on to some of these links at the schools and looking at what types of positions are and what the tasks are. Can any of you think of anything else that you would offer as an activity to your colleagues for exploring with individuals the different types of positions, things that are maybe a good reflective question that you found to ask an individual to help narrow down from the broad to a little bit more at least targeted enough to help them pick a particular school, or even narrow it down to maybe 3 schools that they look at more seriously? We're going to pause for a moment and just see if any of you have anything to share about what activities and kinds of reflective questions helped with that process.
I just want to add to that. Feel free to unmute and kind of add a little too, if you prefer to communicate that way.
We have in the chat that CIS is amazing in showing students this information.
When I used to co-teach on a transition class, we did a lot of exploration just exactly like this, and with Lane Community College. And you know, back then we had the big book with everything that was offered, and just getting students to understand what pre-ETs are, what, you know, a placement test. The biggest concern is, are they ready? Are students ready to read, write, do math at that college level and to really be prepared for it. So understanding the prerequisites, we would do an activity where students would actually put together a brochure after they had done the community college placement test, so that they understood, okay, I can go into this math class. I can start taking these credit classes that are going to go towards this certificate. And they'd put together a whole brochure or a PowerPoint and then go up and teach the rest of the class. And this was for bringing up CIS. This was after we had done weeks of work on CIS to nail down 3 or 4 different areas, careers, and then the students would pick one and do that research on it and do that really deep dive so they understood what's expected in that program, what do I have to do, and what are the outcomes, which is huge with what jobs are out there. And of course, kids go right to how much money will I make? So looking at it that way and doing it as a project with kids in the class and the presenting, because then they would all learn from each other also.
Thank you, Mary Jo. Oh, Adene, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I love that peer model, and I know that that sometimes there's technology and ways of presenting that we wouldn't necessarily do depending on our particular age group or what we're used to, and then you have youth show something else that they've done that reflects their generation, and their peers really gravitate towards that, hearing from each other. And so I love that idea, and any of those hands-on visual things that you can do. I think there's the cognitive piece of people kind of thinking theoretically what they want, what they could do, what they're interested in. And then there's also the visual, can I picture myself in that space? And do I have a realistic idea of what's it gonna feel like to be there? And I kind of wonder, with so much going on virtually and people having these opportunities to do these, to explore colleges and campuses virtually, if it's impacting in any way the experience of students actually starting, and if there's a disconnect because they're kind of anticipating it's going to feel one way, and if they haven't walked on the campus, they may not really fully realize, because it used to be that it was pretty common practice that a lot of times there would be some kind of opportunity to have an open house, or maybe spend a couple days on campus so you could compare different places. We lost a lot of that with COVID. And so I wonder, in some places, what are we able to do in place of that in those situations to help people better assess what's it going to feel like on a day-to-day basis to be in this space with other people, and kind of take it to a more tangible level when they can't access it by actually visiting the campus. So I'd love to hear more if people have ways that you've done that when you weren't able to do the tours or physically be in a space, how you helped students to think about their day-to-day life and what it would feel like, because it can really set people back financially and in time that they lose. And I think also motivation when they experience those starts and stops where there's a disconnect between what they want and are expecting and what the real experience of being in that program is. A lot of dropouts, and that's including across the board with individuals that don't have disabilities. So it would be interesting to see how that rate compares, but just a lot of people that I'm seeing, or parents that I'm hearing reporting that a lot of money has been lost for students that maybe didn't successfully complete the program or complete a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So
comments in the chat too. Someone had said knowing what you don't want to do is sometimes just as important as knowing what you want to do. That's a very good point. There is some around people using a CIS to show all the schools in those fields that they're interested in. There's another comment, finding out what it is a student likes about a dream job. If you see what it is they like, sometimes it gives insight into the precise part of the job or the career that they will best enjoy. Yeah, so there's some really there are really good comments in the chat. Questions around preferences and physical work environment might help narrow down specifics as well. When I ask around, how do you learn best? Informational interviews are good, job shadows, industry tours. So there are some responses in the chat too.
Thank you. Yeah, and what I'm hearing both from students and also from professionals that are working with students in making these decisions is the internet can be great, but it's such a broad, it's like the world is your oyster, and so sometimes individuals making those decisions feel really overwhelmed because they don't even know what direction to go in because there's just so many options. In comparison to, I think about when I was selecting where to go to school, there literally was a shelf in the guidance counselor's office and it was about which magazine you picked up and looked at, and sometimes it was very limited in comparison to how many options you can find now when you look online. So thank you for those of you who have shared some insight into how you're helping students to make those decisions. These are just a few things that we wanted to share with you that we're leaving as links of ways that you can explore. You could use these as activities or even just provide the links to individuals to explore on their own time, but it gives an example of some of those workshops that I've talked about where these were actually free workshops to students where they could go and spend some time where they could be on campus, and there were some virtual pieces to it, but then there were also opportunities to go and see what the hands-on work looks like for the different positions. And then also a really good resource is the Bureau of Labor Statistics has the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and that can be really helpful just in kind of having those discussions about what kind of lifestyle do they want, or maybe what's the cost of living if they're planning to live independently and have to pay for an apartment and a car, and then what will they need to kind of sustain themselves, and then comparing it to the projected outcome, and are they entering a career where there are projected to be opportunities, and so they kind of look at those larger trends. And then also there's a really wide range of apprenticeships in Oregon, and those have some great videos to explore with students. There might be some things that are available that they just didn't even think about themselves exploring. And so that's a good way to visually show them some of the options related to career. And for students who don't love the traditional college classroom, those are some ways to show them that you can actually earn while you're learning. And so they could be, for all intents and purposes, working, but they're actually getting education that will then help them to earn more. So it serves some of the same purposes as colleges do in other ways. And then ONET is another really great search tool for looking at different types of industries and finding out more specifics. And I would encourage you just even sometimes to help students be more accountable to, leaves it a little bit less open-ended for them to just, where do they even start looking? Just say, hey, go check out this website, and before I meet with you again, look up 2 of these things and come back and tell me about it, because looking it up and then being able to articulate to somebody else helps them to hold some of that information and consider it a little bit more than they might if they're just kind of randomly looking through things. And this is another great resource that you can see all the different links that you can click on with Oregon Community College. The Career Pathways handout is another place to explore with students, and you can see the range of the different things that fall under each career pathway. And another thing that is sometimes kind of challenging is figuring out everything that weighs into that decision about determining whether a credential is worth its value. So for the time that somebody is going to invest in it and for the money that they can make, it can be a very involved process of trying to figure out whether it's the best decision and whether it's the best match. And so walking through that process of considering some of the options can be a valuable activity. And just as an example, I went through that process myself, looking at cosmetology and thinking, okay, so if I were choosing a new career and I decided that I wanted to become a florist or work somehow in the floral industry, what would that look like within the state of Oregon? And so, for example, I live in New York State, and if I were somebody moving to a new state, this would be something that I could look into. And so I looked at the demand and you can look at where the industry is going to go to, and it's, there's some increase projected. The median salary is, in comparison to other, other fields could be lower than a student is wanting to make. Then you can look at that. So floral design offers a certification, and it's not something that you have to do, but as I looked more at it, there are benefits. Like if you went some routes, then you might be able to make yourself more marketable, because you could make yourself stand out from other applicants for positions, for example. And so some of these things that you could do in terms of like stackable credentials were not have-tos, but they were things that somebody could do as part of a career development plan to say, well, I want to make myself more marketable so that I don't have to stay in this job. I can see another florist or another opening where somebody is maybe saying that they have openings and I want to be more competitive in the field. And then you could also compare that to another occupation. So how would that compare? Maybe the person has kind of 2 or 3 different types of interests, and they can vary widely. It could be, I'm interested in floral design and I'm also interested in computer technology. So let's look at the 2 differences and see. And sometimes that might mean maybe they have their career in one area and maybe the other is a hobby or maybe something they do part-time on the side to grow an area of business. That's another thing to consider is, for example, I have an Etsy shop. I wouldn't do that, that's not something I could do and sustain a living, but there are people who do that for a living because they, over time, are able to kind of put more effort into that. And so it's kind of interesting to have these conversations with students and compare hypothetically, what are the different outcomes and what would that mean for what your life looks like? And all of those factors kind of help people to make decisions about credentials. And there's no right or wrong answer. And I think the nice thing is that, again, this is a journey, and where you're at might be completely different than where you were at a different point in your life. So I think sharing that too, the fact that they're not committing to something forever. People are very flexible and fluid in their careers. And so I think sometimes just starting somewhere is helpful. And then here there are the different types of certificates and certificate awards. And Lizzie, I'm going to let you kind of take over from here.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so these are some of the certificate awards. This is less than 4 academic years of full-time college study. And so we have a short-term certificate. So this is often what we think of as this, entry-level employment. There's a 1-year certificate. So this could include some of, that test preparation, working on gaining licensure. It could be in preparation for, a degree that's going to require for a longer certificate or a degree. So that could take more time. And this is considering, different programs or vocational technical programs, any adult education, life skill programs, apprenticeship programs, and employer provided programs. And on this next slide, we have an example, of, oops. There we go.
My arrows are not cooperating.
Mine was not either. All right. So we have an example of a pre-apprenticeship program here. And so this is the Oregon Tradeswomen's Pathways to Success program. And so this is a 192-hour apprenticeship program. And it's really looking at kind of employment readiness and training, preparing job seekers for a career in skilled construction trades. And there's a live link on here if you want to learn more about it too. And so this is an earn while you learn model. So what Adene had referred to earlier. And so this is often the next step to a career pathway in the construction industry, particularly with this one. And it really helps to strengthen the workforce. So this is a training program that's offered at no cost to job seekers who meet the program criteria. And, when they complete this, they receive a certificate of completion that's recognized by industry registered apprenticeship training program and employers. And so that's really helping to provide that direct entry into the workforce for those who are qualified program graduates. And so that's just an example of what a pre-apprenticeship program could look like. Okay, so then on this next one, we have advanced degrees. So this is our 2 and 4-year colleges. So an associate's degree, that's typically 2 years, but it's less than 4 full-time academic years at a college level study. And so our example that we have here is Lynn Benton Community College. On the right-hand side, we have our bachelor's degree. And so these are our 4-year colleges. It's a baccalaureate program of study, usually requiring the equivalent of at least 4, not more than 5 full academic years of study. And our example that we have here is Oregon State University.
And then this just gives you a definition. This actually is specific to your state, and it describes at the post-secondary level what career and technical education programs are, and their college level coursework designed to prepare persons for employment, stability, and advancement in specific occupations, or it could be clusters or closely related occupations. And sometimes that's a certificate of completion. It could be an associate of applied sciences, excuse me, sciences, or a bachelor's of applied science. And those are degrees that are approved by the community college board. So it just kind of gives you an idea how it's defined when people use that very broad term. And this is another place that you can go if you are working with a student that really isn't sure where they want to look, but they are pretty sure that maybe they want to consider a trade school. They want the flexibility, or maybe it's related to being close to home, being able to commute, some of those types of things. And this at any given time, and this could have changed since we accessed this for this presentation, but this will give you the top 10 based on a variety of different data. And if you click onto any of these, it has a link that allows you to explore the program. So you could, again, give the individual the option of picking maybe 2 or 3 of these, and then picking a specific type of program that they would want to dive into. And it could be anything. They could write about a day in their life. What would a day in my life look like if I worked at the United Bicycle Institute? And it could be something where maybe they use their imagination, but it also could be something that maybe you just set a goal and it's something somebody can check off, that they did a little bit of further exploration of a certain number of these. So that's a starting point for some of those conversations. The other thing to be aware of in terms of the range of post-secondary education is the fact that there are internships and there are apprenticeships. And this is actually something that was done for another project at the ILR, where it compares some of the characteristics of an internship to an apprenticeship, because those terms are really confusing and sometimes it's difficult to discern what the differences are. So internships tend to be more short term, so typically 1 to 3 months. Apprenticeships are oftentimes longer, 1 to 3 years of studying under somebody. Internships can be more unstructured, and that varies. There's just more variability, versus oftentimes apprenticeships are more structured training plans, and somebody is really looking to acquire mastery. I mean, originally when those historically were started, it was oftentimes somebody who was planning to pass a business on to somebody, or this was they weren't training somebody just for that person's benefit. They were training them because they were going to rely on them as somebody that was going to be operating as part of their business. So an internship, it doesn't always include a mentor. Sometimes people are assigned an internship and they're not assigned to one particular person. Maybe they have different supervisors that they report to, different job requirements. Maybe sometimes the person who oversees it is somebody who's outside of that business. And then with apprenticeships, they tend to be paid, and oftentimes paid fairly well compared to other options. I'm not sure, I should have looked up, I don't know offhand what it starts at right now in your state. I know last I looked up New York, they were at a minimum of $15 and something per hour. I would expect that probably has gone up since I looked it up, but that was being paid while they're also obtaining this level of education. And oftentimes internships are unpaid. They can be paid, but it's not always a given that they will be paid, and they may not lead to full-time employment. Some of them are intended to just be brief, short-term experiences that don't lead to employment. Oftentimes, apprenticeships result in at least some type of opportunity for employment, and they also tend to be industry recognized. So if I become, if I am an apprentice to be a welder, that's industry recognized. And internships may earn college credit, but not always. And then also with apprenticeships, they may earn college credit, and they tend to not accrue debt. Now, internships don't necessarily accrue debt, but it's kind of, I think the thing that people really seem to value about apprenticeships is that ability to generate an income versus going to college and having to take out a college loan type of thing. And sometimes internships are accessed through college where they're also paying tuition to work for somebody, which is kind of an interesting, I remember being in that position and even in grad school, working tremendously hard and thinking, and I'm paying you to do this because it's part of a credit bearing program. So those are just kind of some overarching characteristics to help you talk about the differences between those.
All right, so these are some examples of some practical steps that you can suggest to students that you're supporting. And so this is really around, and I could say that this could also be used if you are wanting to break down into some goal setting as well. But really, what is it that students need to learn, find, and prepare? And so in terms of learning, how are they managing their schedule, or how are they thinking about kind of that time management piece? Is there anything that they need to learn around navigating campus, or anything around considering transportation needs? And then how are they taking care of their own health? Are they eating right? Are they supporting their mental health? And then kind of leading into this middle column of find, how are they locating that support? How are they building that community? And finding those people that they trust and that they can kind of build that rapport and those connections and those relationships with in their community. So, how are they connecting with their peers? Are they getting to know their professors or other college staff? What networking opportunities can they kind of tap into? What are some of those work experiences where they're kind of expanding on their social kind of capacity and circles there? And how are they preparing for creating, some of those career and academic goals and plans? Are they experiencing some early engagement in career assessment and exploration? Have they been provided that opportunity? And in terms of job search and skills, are they practicing their resumes? Are they kind of doing that interview practice that we talked a little bit about earlier? Are they, kind of practicing their elevator speeches? Have they attended career fairs? Do they know the questions to ask, or how to, kind of navigate career fairs and kind of do those elevator speeches there? So just thinking about these in terms of preparing students that you're supporting in kind of these different areas as they are thinking about exploring post-secondary options. And then here we have the Wheel of Power and Privilege. And so this is an image from Sylvia Duckworth. And as we're thinking about that support for students and approaching this from a lens of intersectionality, And knowing that people are complex and there's many layers of people's identity, we need to be aware of and consider how inequitable practices exist within systems and within people. And that can have an impact. It can create barriers for those who aren't at the center of this wheel of power and privilege. And so if we were to look at this at, kind of 12 o'clock center where it says power, we have white, post-secondary, able-bodied, heterosexual, neurotypical, robust, slim, owns property, rich, English, cisgender man, citizen. And for people with disabilities and intersecting identities, what additional barriers do they face when it comes to post-secondary options and other things as well? So if we kind of move further out of this circle where it says marginalized at 12 o'clock, we have different shades, white, high school education, some disability, gay men, neuroatypical, mostly stable. As we move further out of this circle here at 6 o'clock, we have large body size, homeless, poor, non-English, monolingual, trans, intersex, non-binary, undocumented. And so thinking about, we don't have the time to kind of dialogue about this today, but thinking about this work moving forward and the individuals that you're supporting, how are we providing support and services that's engaging in practices that are equitable, that are culturally responsive, and they're really highlighting the cultural assets and wealth of students who have been historically marginalized, underrepresented, and kind of how are we building this awareness of those systemic barriers that exist and that lack of access and opportunities that have not allowed people who have been historically marginalized to either further pursue education or further pursue employment, and thus that catalyst for higher paying jobs. So something to think about as you're providing support for students. And hopefully this is a conversation that we can carry on in the future.
And it's kind of in illustrating how you might utilize these kinds of conversations for activities as a team, and thinking a little bit more about the opportunities that are available for different students that you're engaging with. We put this in as an example. This was something that I think we received a newsletter, and in going through some of the links, this was something that there was information about related to some gaps for students of who belong to tribal nations. And so it was a press release, and so there's funding specifically tied to it's tuition for Native students. And they actually, if you go into this, they list the specific tribes, and they pay for it. They said most of tuition, housing, books, and other costs. So it helps to fill in the gaps of some other grants and funding that some students might be receiving. And it can be applied towards undergraduate or graduate studies. And so we wanted to highlight this because the deadline is actually coming up August 1st. So this is kind of a timely opportunity. And actually you can see to the right, they have that little graph or the little map that shows the specific tribes. And what I really appreciate is, again, this shows where Oregon is really thinking about where are the gaps and how can we attach funding to those gaps. And sometimes it can be beneficial just to Google something or, do a search where you put in equity gaps for students, and you can do that by gender. Sometimes you can do that by racial group. You can sometimes do that for students in foster care, students that have, juvenile justice experience and things like that. So I would be thinking about, and this may vary from, from region to region, but where are the largest gaps? Because your state is really gathering some data that helps you to look at the differences maybe between the nuances of different groups. And then it can help to drive some decisions about maybe who you do outreach to, or certain funding that you might search, and how you might share it more broadly and things like that. So that was just an example of some of the things that you can engage in together as a team to help level the playing field a little bit for some of the students in your state. And then we included with us some additional resources. So this is something very basic that comes from motivational interviewing. And those of you who have had motivational interviewing have seen different versions of this, but we did include it because it could actually be something you could print pretty easily. And sometimes even for that feature of being able to have something that you could just print is really just kind of helping to narrow down when a student is trying to make a decision about, do I do this? Do I not do this? Do I go this route or another route? It helps them to look at the advantages and disadvantages. And so that's the decisional balance tool. And this is another motivational interviewing tool, which is really just a model for, sometimes it's just helpful to keep the acronym in mind to keep yourself in check. How much am I talking versus allowing the student to talk and process? Am I pausing when I share information to allow them to let me know they're following me or they're not following me, or to ask permission to get more information? So it kind of starts with, you ask permission to share. Can I talk with you about such and such? And then you talk to them about clarifying gaps. And then you provide some information, but just being mindful, depending on who it is, at not overwhelming them with so much information at once without allowing time to process. And then you elicit, okay, what did you hear me say? What information stands out to you about this? Do you have any questions about what I've shared already? Those kinds of things. So just a helpful reminder of some of those techniques. And then you'll see we put some other resources at the end that we thought that you might be interested in. We have included also our names and email addresses. If you have any questions about this content that you're not able to ask today, or something, a follow-up need that you have, you can please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, we do have some time here at the end that we wanted to allow for people to, if there's comments or questions that you have. And our colleague Kim Osmani is here to join us too. So we're happy to have a little bit of dialogue.
I'm also going to plug in one more email. This will be the email that's just kind of the general ICAP email. And if you have any questions, you can also send them to this general email as well.
Hey, Dean, I want to just take a second before we go into questions, kind of bookend this a little bit and connect it to everything. So yesterday we were talking about the measures and this long-term trajectory of supporting an individual's life. And we were talking what, and we were talking so what? What does this mean for us in our work? So as we consider all of this excellent, very in-depth content, I'm seeing pre-employment transition services in the areas of career exploration and post-secondary counseling. Just tons of information here, tons of resources that I'm sure we're going to want to dive into deeper together at some point in time, or within your consortia, to look and see what can be done. This material will be included in what we post on the YTP website, so that you have this, that you have the links that are embedded on most of the slides. There were references to where we can find stuff, tons of links at the end with resources. So I just wanted to kind of like pull that all together here, and then let's open the floodgates for questions, comments, ideas. And we have until, if we need it, up until 10:45 before we go to break.
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment. This is amazing stuff. So it made me really just kind of motivated and excited to dive in to check out everything that you guys are offering. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Is it Yesenia? Is that how you pronounce your name? I love that. Beautiful name.
You did it. You pronounced it perfectly.
Oh, good, good.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's helpful to just have the mindset that this can be overwhelming because it is so broad. For me, it helps build empathy in when I hear students, having a son who just graduated, and knowing that open-ended question where people are always asking, what's your next step? What are you going to do? Regardless of where somebody is, if they've taken a break from their career, people are asking them, well, what are you going to do next? And even when people retire now, people are like, what are you going to do next? Because it's expected you take another next step. But I think it shows you, gosh, this is a lot to consider by yourself. So if nothing else, partnering with somebody, just saying, hey, I'll be somebody to help you, maybe narrow down, maybe take some of the emotion out of it and help you make more clear-cut decisions or something like that. I think it starts with really that talking with individuals about their preferences and interests, because that narrows down a lot. Because if you know somebody hated traditional schooling, you already know to a certain extent, okay, well, maybe I want to start with looking at some kind of apprenticeship or maybe a trade option or something that they're able to engage in hands-on learning in a different way. So I think it's going to vary. You're going to have some students that you're going to know, oh, maybe they only want to look at Ivy League schools. So I think the idea is more that you're just aware that there's a partnership and an opportunity to help somebody feel like they're not alone in navigating all that.
I was just gonna say, Adene, too, with that, there's so much, I think, even within this presentation, we included so many links. There's so much that's happening in Oregon, which I think is really exciting. And I think too, just touching on that partnership and collaboration, and thinking about that partnership and collaboration in particular with the career coaches, as this program kind of, as the grant kind of, unfolds and those relationships are built. I think that'll be in a really exciting piece of it too, is just, building those networks and that, that support, even, to kind of even strengthen that support. And those students are really going to be, or adults as well, will really be benefiting from that collaboration between kind of all the different people who are involved. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, that makes me think of too, I mean, sometimes even in projects, thinking about where can you store things when staff find something that might be of interest to other people and they want to share it. Maybe you find a new funding opportunity, or sometimes I know people, I was in a training where people were sharing just occupations that they stumbled on where the companies were training their own staff, and it was known that but it wasn't one of those widely, like you couldn't just access that information anywhere. You had to hear it from somebody who generated an interest to cause you to look at it. So I think that if you all could think about how can you among your group share things that you find to save some time for each other, whether that be something that you just periodically share printed resources, or if you have some live means of being able to, like, in the moment update things. I think it's always helpful because when you hear something from your colleagues or somebody who's actually taken a student through a process and you know that somebody else recommends it, that can be a huge time saver for other people.
Absolutely. I think another one of the things that we do a lot of collaboration at the schools that I work with, we try and work as a team, but we're just coming out of this, this place that we've never been in before, where we're not able to go do things, or, there's so many regulations around the pandemic. And now there's so many students who are now taking that really interest, or not getting out of that fear and wanting to go out and work, or wanting to get more additional training. So it makes it really exciting for us who have been kind of like waiting and trying to figure things out in this weird space we've all been in. So for me, this is very refreshing, and it motivates me a lot. So that's really helpful, and to, keep building our team. One of my biggest goals this summer is to maybe come up with some kind of a packet that I can share with the SPED teachers on my campus, because we have a lot of new teachers coming in, but that we're all kind of seeing that same language, because I think we sometimes try and pull from all these different areas. And there's so much out there that we get overwhelmed. So that's my biggest goal. It's always getting organized. That's always my summer goal. And, it's usually just kind of keeps going. But that I would love to have something like that I can kind of generate, say, here's what I have that I can share with you. We can work on this and collaborate together. So we're all kind of speaking that same language.
Yeah, that's great. And even, I know sometimes people get caught up in, that has to be perfect before I share it or whatever. And sometimes even just sharing it in stages, people are happy to take something very simple that you could build on later. But if you have, access and time to work on something that's going to save other people time and going to connect more students to some of these opportunities, then go for it. And I really love the enthusiasm and the optimism that you have, because I think that's really needed right now, just for people in general, to have somebody who has hope and excitement about it.
You know what? Since we have time, I just want to go back to the wheel of power and privilege. And I think how powerful that is. I think that we all are looking for authentic ways to tackle the topic of equity and breaking down barriers. And I can vision even just bringing this wheel out to a student or a group of students and doing an activity where you have them self-identify. And then, you know, you're talking about locate, learn, locate, like all of these skills. Where do I locate my resources if I am a transgender person? Where are my resources on a college campus? Where are my community resources? Because having a cohort, having a community makes all of the things more doable, right? It builds confidence. And so I really appreciate having that in here. And I can see really applicable uses of something like this and wrapping all of these supports around the students that we're working with. And so thank you for including that. I don't know if other people are thinking of ideas of how to use it. It'd be fun to maybe just generate a few ideas there too.
Like a community mapping, it's like you're describing, you know, you could use it for that kind of activity. I love that, of making it tangible. Yeah.
Mhm.
Even just to me, self-reflective to have students, because you don't necessarily know where somebody falls in all these categories. And even if they feel comfortable sharing one more aspect of themselves with you based on this, then that can be beneficial. I do love, and I don't know, forgive me if Lizzie already read it, but I loved the one reflective question that was in here, because we'd ask people to share reflective questions. And it was about, I'm trying to go back and read it, about like, if you could do anything and there was no money attached, what would you do? And I thought, what a great question. Like, I feel like we all kind of could benefit from answering that. It's like, you know, what would it be if you didn't have any of those barriers? It's that passion, you know, and I love that as a reflective question. And what are the because then what are the aspects of that that you like? Because maybe even if that's not, you know, what you do right away, still striving for something with elements of that, or, you know, matching something, some piece of that. That's a really great question.
I do think of this too as, you know, if there's any work around, you know, self-reflection. I think of this as a self-reflection tool as well. And like kind of, you know, thinking about, you know, measurable post-secondary goals and how people might be thinking about, you know, expectations for students, but kind of understanding where you may be situated on here and where the student that you're supporting may identify on this, you know, this wheel as well. And just kind of doing some self-reflection and thought around that as well as you're supporting them, talking about their future and kind of their goals and what they're hoping to explore, and thinking about it in terms of that context as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lizzie. Yesterday, we engaged in a trauma-informed care training, and we were talking about some of the considerations as a professional for that, and the kind of even just by nature of something like our gender, how sometimes there's a recognition that people come from trauma, that particular gender might be something that could be, it could have a connotation of like a power difference or something. So the difference in sitting behind a desk versus moving your chair over and sitting next to somebody can create a power shift. And so I think sometimes when we look at some of these categories that maybe have to do with, you know, ways that people have felt marginalized, and just kind of considering based on who you are and your identity, are there any things that that initially, when people met you, you know, maybe there are some initial things that you could do about how you set up your space that reduce that feeling of like power and hierarchy over people.
While we have you here too, and our whole amazing YTP network, are there questions about ICAP in general? So we had an introductory session at OSTC. Our May community of practice was focused around this, but we know everybody's busy and not everybody makes all of the things, and we have a nice, good crowd here. So it could also be a great time to ask questions if you have any. If we don't have the answer, it helps us to know the questions so that we can hear them, create supports and answers and resources for you in the future. So now would also be a time if anybody's got questions about that to raise those. And if not, after good wait time, we can break a little bit early if we need to, but don't be shy. We have good time together right now.
And you all are a great group, I just want to say. It's been nice interacting, and just the interaction, and we know it's hard. People are Zoom fatigued. So thank you for your interaction with us today. It's been nice.
I love the chat engagement too. That's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
This is Kim. I was also just going to add a thank you. I'm trying to scroll back to the very beginning of whomever shared the Dr. Kit website for career assessments that it's tied into ONET. It's always good to find the new resources to share. And in fact, that's something that I'm using with my own children this summer. They're 11 and 14, getting them to try and start doing some assessments that are more at their level so they can start getting an idea, because, you know, my son thinks he's going to be an NBA player, and we talk about, you know, the ins and outs of that as far as what's required and the height. And my daughter thinks she might want to be a pediatrician, but, you know, doesn't really love math. So it's a great time, and I appreciate the sharing of resources. And Michelle, I was just going to mention, so you guys have the YTP website, which is a wonderful resource. I wonder if you have the capability of putting, I don't know if you guys also use like a Google Drive for any sharing of live information, but where you could put, we did this in one of our previous projects where we just had a Word doc, and it was just a table that had 2 columns. The left side column said resources I'd like to share, and the right column said resources I'm looking for. And so participants like your YTP specialist could go in, and like that Dr. Kit could be shared on the left-hand side. And, you know, someone could be responsible for kind of maybe looking at the categories of where those things fall. But then on the right-hand side, like I can list, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, and folks can just share those things. So as that Adene was talking about those sharing of resources, that was one of the ideas that kind of I started remembering from a previous project.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Most of the schools across Oregon use Google, so that would be really possible. Sometimes we at the state level have a hard time accessing Google stuff, but there are workarounds to that. But that's an awesome idea for us to consider there too, if people would find that helpful. Yes.
We have used for a New York State project that I'm on, we use Slack, which, and I'm still kind of learning, but it was accessible to more people than, you know, within house we use SharePoint and things like that people were having trouble, you know, we were having trouble with people being able to access it. But Slack allowed us to, like, you can put it on your phone and then people get notified if you post something. So if somebody came across a resource, they could just upload it and it was a place to store it. So just something to look into. I don't know the pros and cons, but it might be worth investigating.
Awesome. Okay. Other than wishes that Oregon Promise would allow for a gap year, I am not seeing anything else in the chat. So much gratitude for this wonderful partnership that we're with intention, thinking about how YTP and ICAP can, with intention, make these connections for students and build a bridge of support over time. So really, really grateful that you were able to be here, that we were able to spend some time together. And I know I'm personally really looking forward to all the things to come in this realm. With that team, management team, YTP management team, Cornell team, anything else before we wrap up and go to break? Our break will take us all the way until 11 o'clock. That's a good long break.
Actually, 10:55.
Just kidding. Thanks, Garrett. 10:55.
I think
We'll put that in
we're
the
good on
chat.
our end, right, Lizzie? Are we good?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for your time. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. It's been wonderful to kind of delve into this with all of you. So
Izzy, it's
Agreed.
nice to see you. We miss you back here.
it's nice to see you too. I know it's very nice to see all these familiar, friendly faces. So
Well, you should all know Lizzie spread the word that you all are good folks. So, so that was helpful because, you know, I hadn't worked with your
I
state.
give a lot of love to Oregon. So
Yes.
Hey.
Great. All right, y'all, we'll go on break here and see people back at 10:55.
thank you.
Guys, thanks, Lizzie. Thanks, Adene.
Thanks.
Are we recording during breaks? I forget.
I'm just reminding everyone. Garrett, I guess.
So Heather, it's all yours.
And I think there was a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to
Okay,
attend to that
let me look. Where is the chat?
about homeschool students eligible for YTP.
I think that's a good question to connect with your technical assistance provider about. There are a whole bunch of factors that come into play, and I don't think we have the time to address that right now. So Heather, I think just take it away.
All right. Well, y'all probably don't want to hear a bunch of stuff about me. I'm a human in training like all of you. And yes, I've done some voc rehab stuff and some stuff with students. They're some of my favorite people in the world. And all of you are some of my favorite people and maybe some friends I haven't yet met. So I'll be your guide today in the next 50 minutes, a conversation that I call engaging students in empowering conversations with work and career, because that's kind of our thing in YTP. We hope a little bit anyway. And a visual description of me: I'm a 50-ish-year-old white woman with glasses, shoulder length, brown and silver hair. I'm wearing a fuchsia colored shirt, and I have an elephant watercolor on the wall behind me. I'm also supported by my lovely Weimaraners, Vivi and Miley, in case they get spunky or spicy during the session today. Usually they pretty much just take a nap when I work all day, which is a great job to have. So as Terry kind of shared this, we start this conversation, we know that student engagement can be quite challenging, and I hope that we can explore a few ideas about ways that the heart, the mindset, and the skills of the conversation style motivational interviewing might support us as service providers, whatever our role is, to engage with students, as well as advocates, partners, and other folks. I always say our students have a posse. And all of this to support shared outcomes. You as participants in this session will not hear me blah, 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 blah the whole time. I hope that you will also participate in the ways that you would like to and can. For the session, you might want something to take notes with, to fully participate in some of the activities as invited to do so. And there will be a variety of specific skills to experiment with and you'll be invited to reflect on during our time today. Based on your goals and needs and style and practice, we hope that you'll also create a little bit of a learning plan with support from your technical assistance providers. I've provided a number of kind of after activities that folks could decide to do together, depending on your goals and needs. So a framework for a brief conversation. We all come to conversations from different perspectives. I have my own learned and lived experiences, and a framework that I'm informed by is motivational interviewing. Am I, as we often call it, because we just love acronyms, right?
not really. MI is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. It informs my belief system and the skills that I use in conversation. Its purpose, as I understand it, is really to engage, to evoke, and to strengthen motivation and commitment for growth and change for students, well, and other humans in their own life with your collaboration. So if you're looking to affect motivation for students to engage with your services or work or education, as probably you heard a little bit about ICAP, or maybe there's something else that you're hoping that they might engage with, MI might have something to offer. So first question for all of you. What do we notice when students are engaged with us? Maybe it's in services or our processes or shared goals. What do we notice? Post something in chat. What do we notice? Okay, so they're looking at us, so there's some attention. There's an affect, maybe excitement, energy. They start asking us some questions. Hopefully they're connected with the conversation that you're having with them, or they're curious about something. There's a confidence maybe that they have. There's they're kind of looking up, looking in, looking with you. There's a connection. They start doing some things maybe. They might say, I want to, I am, I can. They show up. Huge thing in engagement, right? We know there's disengagement when people aren't there. It doesn't mean that we've done something wrong. It only means that there's something missing. There's a need that hasn't yet happened. So how about parents? What do we notice when parents are engaged with us? Oh, some similar things. They're connecting with you. There's communication. Maybe they're the parent that calls a lot. They're very engaged with you. They get emails or responses. They ask for your opinion. They're friendly. So there's something open and welcoming about them. Maybe they come to you for things. Immediate text returns. Yeah. We can't hide, right? And how about advocates? What do we notice when advocates are engaged with us? So maybe those are the other folks around the students. Maybe it's a services coordinator or something, some other role or of their around the student. So what do we notice when advocates are engaged with us, with the process, and with the shared goals? They show up, they ask questions, they want to know more about the details, the services, what's happening. There's collaboration, yeah, shared ideas. Love it when someone with another perspective and resource comes to the conversation with a gift, right, for the group. And they clarify, they ask questions. We all don't know all things about each other's roles or services. And so when we're asking more questions and learning more about perspective and what's out there, yeah, and that connection, yeah, able to lean on one another. So when you feel that you have a true partner in that person, there's some things that you notice. So you're all experts in working with your own students and within your own practice, and you likely have the best ideas about how to go about working with your own students and folks. So what we're already doing and trying to engage might already be working. And there might be some things that we want to tweak a little bit or shift focus on. So when thinking about what we notice when students are engaged, what things are we already doing that work better for engaging students? When we notice those things about students, they're paying attention, they're engaged, they're coming, they're showing up, they're doing some things. What are we doing like kind of think backwards. What are we doing that might be inspiring that in them? So asking for their interests. So we're curious about them, asking about their future. So there's a listening component, which is always a fun thing to think about. What does listening mean, right? We show attention. There's something personal about the conversation with them. We show respect. We care. There's a feeling component, a connection, care and concern. And there's things that we do to show that with students. So perhaps this is a shared value of this group, that engagement in students first might be one of the reasons that you're here in this room, spending your time growing and exploring together. If only it were that easy, right? If we came to the conversation with what we view as this perspective taking, respect, and care and concern and questioning and interest in their life, if it always worked as if by magic, right? We want folks to be engaged. We hope for that. And sometimes it can be even more challenging for us to be in the space to invite engagement, to be and do all of those things that folks posted in the chat and the other things you also do. So there are things that often get in the way for us to be in this space of perspective taking, of care and concern, and respect and curiosity. And some folks might call some of that empathy for others, a creativity space to inspire engagement. So consider some of the challenges, the obstacles, the difficulties, and maybe even some of the limitations that we have. There's systems. We are in systems that are complex. So what are things that for us that get in the way of our being able to be in that space of engagement that we would like to be? We think about sometimes our systems, the things that we're required to do, the pace of things, the amount of and complexity of students and challenges, sometimes the labels on the language that we use to describe our students, and the acronyms. Like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed often with acronym soup. Are there things that you imagine that might be in the way of our coming to the conversation as we would like at every moment? We're humans. I call myself a human in training because I am. And why does this matter? Well, one of the things I think about is that the relationship, this healing, helping, caring relationship, this respectful relationship between the participant or student and the provider, us, whatever our role is perhaps the most important predictor of good outcomes and lasting change, whatever outcomes that we're hoping for together. In 2012, there was a research study that I often connect with and connects with me sort of like in my stomach. The title of it was called, "Is Low Therapist Empathy Toxic?" I just love the title of that, because like, why wouldn't you think of a title of a research article that says, "Is low therapist empathy toxic?" So it shared that there were poor outcomes for people who engaged in services with a service provider with low empathy than outcomes for folks who never saw a service provider at all. So think about that. If they never showed up, they were better off than if they came in and saw someone who was not able to be in an empathy space with them in the moment. Ouch. For me, it reminded me how important we are as humans. Empathy supports growth. It is the foundation to which that healing, that helping encounter rests. And it's within this context that the work of change can move forward. So expressing empathy is that key. It's the key to establish that good relationship, to unlock the door the gate, wherever we're trying to go to, right? And without it, it's less likely that a student will engage in our process or anything that we're hoping that they might engage with us about. So imagine for a moment, how might it shift the way we work with students if we truly understood their perspective? I'm not saying I want to go back and be an emerging adult again. Please no. And do we ever think that a student is unmotivated? I know that I've used that language before. And then I think that, well, honestly, we're all motivated for something. And perhaps it might not be what we expect or what we're hoping that they might be motivated for. I believe that motivation is interrelational, that it's within that relationship that the motivation maybe is inspired or grown or cultivated. And what we as the practitioner, as the service provider, as the person working alongside that student and family, what we believe, think, and do in the conversation matters. Yeah, that's a fun visual on the slide. And that sort of flipping of the look-see, and then, yeah, sometimes we all process so differently. So what helps us to grow this capacity for perspective taking and the wonder around sort of maybe that reflective process about what the student and or family might be experiencing? This word to me comes to mind, curiosity. When you think of this word curiosity, what associations do you have with it? I'm curious for folks to post in the chat. I'm curious about curiosity. What do you think of? What do you associate with this word curiosity? Interest, want, wonder, yeah, what else? Excitement, research, intelligence, look at exploring, why, the question why, right? I think about 3-year-olds, why, every question, right? And we lose that as we grow. So my social story about curiosity is one of wonder and play and a little bit about investigation and kind of stumbling around. It's this sort of this journey of curiosity versus maybe a place that we arrive at. It's sort of that limitless, great, because it's sort of there's always more, right? And what if curiosity was intentional, turned inwards, curious about ourselves as a sort of self-reflection, and also turned outwards? What is that like, and how does it help us? How can we be curious and to show curiosity to others? Maybe there's sometimes, questions, this wondering, like Michelle posted, how do you feel? Sort of these wondering, curious questions. And maybe there's also something that's nonverbal that we do. That's that kind of questioning stance. Do we know, like, folks sometimes have that look of that questioning look. Our faces have so much to offer in being able to portray this curiosity, this place of wonder with folks. And sometimes silence can show curiosity with others. Really taking the opportunity to be with and to invite the other person's voice forwards in whatever way that they want to convey or communicate to us. And then also, I think of empathy and listening as a way of showing our curiosity with others about their perspective. So shifting into some activities maybe to help us grow our inner space of curiosity and to share it with others. These activity guides for the rest of our session have all been shared with your YTP technical assistance team. I don't know where they went from there and when they'll be offered to you, and know that they are available. I'm going to do a demo here with Becky, who kindly offered to be my live demo activity partner. So hopefully Becky's here today amongst the crew of 100 or so friends.
Hi, Heather. I'm here.
Hey, great to see and hear you. Holy moly, it's been a moment.
I know. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, thanks.
Good.
Living the dream.
I was thinking that you and I could have the same description. 50-year-old women with glasses.
We're twins.
We're twins today. Except I don't have Weimaraners. I have a golden retriever and a pit bull.
It's great to have co-pilots. So our first activity, thinking reflectively, it's a guessing game, basically. So the focus of the activity is to become more aware that our guesses about meaning are really hypotheses to be tested. So Becky's going to share one thing you should know about me is with some kind of adjective or descriptor that Becky chooses. And I'll be guessing about Becky's meaning by using do you mean questions. And Becky is going to respond to me, to my do you mean questions with a yes or a no, depending on kind of how close it is to her meaning of the statement. So ready, Becky?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Heather, one thing you should know about me is that I am creative.
Do you mean that you have a lot of ideas?
Yes.
Do you mean that you enjoy crafts?
No.
Do you mean that you're an excellent decorator?
No.
Do you mean that you have a great imagination?
Yes.
Okay. So usually you do about 4 or 5 times. So that was really hard. Not a lot of feedback. And yet I know that you're not a crafty person. And so the lots of ideas and the imagination was more sort of perhaps in the like where what were creative meant more to you. So it reminded me of that game, like you're hot, you're cold, except there wasn't like a warm button in there. So we've got a second activity. Thanks for that, Becky. And the second activity is called Forming Reflections. So Forming Reflections' purpose is to learn how to form reflective listening statements rather than asking questions, to evolve our perspective detective skills. So I'm gonna guess a different statement from Becky. So Becky's gonna do, again, a one thing you should know about me is statement. And starting from and it'll be a different one. I don't get the same word because I already kind of have some ideas about that one. So starting from the question format that we used in the thinking reflective activity, I'm going to flip my questions to reflections. So I'm going to take the do you mean off, and I'm going to take the question mark at the end off and put the thing in the middle. And this time I get a bonus in that Becky's going to respond naturally to my reflections. So ready with your second?
Yes. Heather, one thing that you should know about me is that I am caffeinated.
You have lots of energy.
Well, I start each day with a cup of coffee, so I'm definitely caffeinated, and I help support a school-based business called Saxon Smart Brew, and we make a lot of coffee. So I feel like my day is very caffeinated.
So coffee is a big part of your life.
It is. Coffee is a big part of my life and a lot of my memories as well. My grandfather loved Folgers coffee and always kept different nuts and bolts in red Folgers cans in his garage. So definitely love sitting around drinking a cup of coffee with people and having a chance to visit.
So caffeine and coffee, something that inspires some emotion in you.
Oh, definitely. Oh, definitely. I think you can have some really great conversations around a cup of coffee. And I think there's actually a great quote about the Starbucks owner and how conversations and coffee just go hand in hand. It's not the direct quote. So if somebody wanted to put that in the chat, they could. But it's great. I think coffee and conversations go together.
A coffee has meaning and connection for you in your life.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yes, very much so.
So how was that conversation for you, Becky?
It was good. I felt like I got to share a little bit about me and, my values for sure. I'm really very proud of the young baristas that we've worked with here at South, and to see their growth was one of the reasons I selected the word. So I feel like I had a chance to kind of share a little bit more about my history and my values and the importance of connection with people.
And I have to say, like, from my experience, it was way easier for me to learn about and get closer to the meaning. I would not like the word caffeinated. I don't drink coffee, so like it wouldn't have been the place that I would have gone in your meaning. And so it was really helpful to me that, as I sort of start, like I was kind of going more to active, lots of energy, bubbly personality, something around that. And you bringing in coffee was like this cue to me going in the direction to really understand your perspective about caffeinated and what that word and that quality to you. It's incredibly complex.
And it's something, interestingly, it's just something as simple as a cup of coffee.
At the end of the day, coffee is just coffee.
Coffee. Well, I'm not sure about that. I think but yes, a good cup of coffee is a great thing.
And now we know it definitely is way more for you in your life. Well, thank you.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
you being my live demo partner. It's not as fun to do it by yourself. Way more fun to do it with friends. So thank you, Becky.
Thank you very much.
And we hope that you'll all try out these activities and see what you notice in the curiosity. Yeah, the personal stories, right? We are all storytellers. We have stories inside us. And how do we invite our students to share their stories with us? There's so much meaning making that can happen in connection. Yeah. And it can be as simple as holding the space with the student with curiosity. So I could have asked the "do you mean" questions, and it felt like a richer conversation for me as the listener, not knowing anything about these pieces for Becky. So, and I had no idea that that Becky ran a coffee business at her school. So very cool thing to learn. So curiosity about the student's experience and perspective, being intentionally and non-judgment, supports me to be in empathy and supports reflective listening. So this idea of being curious, I think of as the inner capacity for reflection and reflective listening, which is a way that we can share empathy with others, and can be a way that we convey that we see and hear them. So considering and imagining and learning what's behind the behavior for students could be many things. Could be trauma, could be experiences with systems. Sometimes it's adults telling them what to do and they're fed up with that. Could be other things that are behind the student's perspective and what they're sharing with us. We can be the one to create the opportunities to listen, to understand. Listen for stories, listen for perspective. It's one of the magic moments of being a human, to be able to build connection in those magic moments. So a second skill that I'll introduce are affirmations. There's some brain research about when an affirmation is received, it can support an opening a person's mind, can support building a relationship of engagement, and can also support self-efficacy, which can be particularly helpful when a student is getting ready to take on a new challenge, or maybe there's something that we want to do and we're not quite sure that we can or it's possible. Some students come to us and they're feeling frustrated, stuck, hopeless, like there's not something for them in their future, and everybody needs to be oriented towards their own inner capacity and resource to be able to sort of move forward, to take the steps that they might imagine that could potentially be possible in their own life with a partner like you. So a couple of things I think about with affirmations: it's really important that they're personal and genuine, that they're specific to that student and that maybe that moment, and maybe even the work that you're doing together, that they come from a genuine, authentic place. Our students can definitely read when we're not being our real, authentic, genuine selves, and that they recognize perhaps a strength that they prize. It's a way of prizing our students, a bit like Carl Rogers for folks who are into person-centered stuff. Use the word prizing, and I connect that with affirmations. They can also be acknowledgement of a student's efforts, the things that you're noticing that they're doing, no matter how small. That just reminded me of Dr. Seuss. And also perhaps appreciation, genuine appreciation of something within them, an attribute or effort or something that you're noticing they keep trying, and or maybe like when they show up, we can genuinely and honestly say, thank you for coming, thank you for being here. You could have chosen to be elsewhere. Glad that you're here with me doing this thing together. So let's try this activity. And along the way, I'll share an example from my own practice. So if you have something to write with and on, that can sometimes be helpful, or you can do it in your head, or decide to do it at another time. It's all right too. So first thing, think of a difficult participant, student, whatever, advocate, family member. So someone that you feel more challenged by in your work right now. So got a student that I'm thinking of that one of the challenges is that they're not always present. They've got a lot of stuff going on. So kind of as you're kind of building this story, what is it that, like, when that student or family member or advocate, that person came to mind for you, what's your story around kind of what it is that makes them difficult? Like why you chose them. And with this particular student, there's a lot of medical and health things and mental health and resource issues, I think, that get in the way, that they're not always present at things that we plan. So what are some strengths? If you can imagine some strengths behind the behavior or intention. So I'm imagining the strengths behind the behaviors. Okay, so for this student, they are letting me know when they're not coming, which is awesome. So they're not just not showing up, which is, it's a great skill to have, to be able to, and they're also making choices for their well-being. So they're making decisions about their priorities and needs, and they're doing that for themselves. So there's maybe a strength behind they know when they need to take a break or take care of themselves, and they're doing those things for themselves, and they're letting me know that they're not coming. So if I were to then form an affirmation to that student that is in service of the relationship and our work together. So affirmations are statements. They usually start with the word you. They're directed at the person, and it's not like good job you cheerleading. It's more around behind. So in coming up with this affirmation for my student, I may think, and I'll make up a name for them. Joan, you consistently make decisions for yourself around your health and mental health and well-being. You notice when you need to take a break, and you let me know when you're not ready or able to connect with me in our work together. So in that affirmation, I'm specifically calling out a couple of skills and strengths within that student that I hope to elevate and also share in our relationship. The student may respond and say, no, that's not at all what I'm doing, or that's not what I'm about, or they may have a different response or connection with what I've shared for them. In practicing this skill, even if I don't show the share the affirmation with the student, think about how does creating it feel for you? What does it do to your mindset and heart set around working with that student that we maybe at the beginning thought was difficult? But what happens when we put our strengths lenses on? And how might the student feel if you shared it with them? If you said these words to them? What might it do for the relationship and or for your work together? So in thinking about how we're oriented in our mindset or heart set, and what that does, sort of what is it, how does it connect with how we respond to others? I'd like to share an activity that I often do when I'm stuck in my practice with a student that I find more challenging to work with. So the finding affirmations is one, or creating affirmations, and another is more of a perspective taking activity. So again, would love for you to participate along. So think about, we all have folks that are more challenging for us to serve and support for whatever reason. Sometimes it's timing, and sometimes it's something within us or them. So these students and others, they put us through our paces in a lot of ways. And sometimes I feel uneasy about my work, or even maybe dreading the next encounter with the student, or like, what am I going to do? How am I going to be? What's next? So consider your own work situation and role, and think about who that person might be for you, that student that you're most challenged with working with right now. And I'm going to ask you 3 questions to consider and reflect on. So the first question, imagine for a moment where you are now in your work with them. Kind of what's the state of the union in your work with this student? Just make a note for yourself. Where are things at? And the second question for reflection is, where would you like to be? Here's where you are. Where would you like things to be in your work together, your work with this student? What are you hoping for within your relationship together and your work? Where would you like things to be? If you could sprinkle a little magic unicorn fairy dust, that's what my 6-year-old friend does. Where would you like to be? And the third question for reflection is, what is getting in the way? What do you imagine might be getting in the way of that happening? Of you and this student being in that place that you would like to be together with your relationship and your work? What do you imagine? So now we're going to do something they only do in the movies, I think, and get into your student's perspective. So imagine that you are this student and really sort of put yourself in their body, mind, heart, spirit, skin, and answer these questions for reflection. Where are you now in your work with your YTP specialist, voc rehab counselor, whatever your role is, right? If you were this student, where are you now in your work with this practitioner, this person, this service provider you're working with? What would they say? And the second question, as this student, what would you imagine that they would say? Where would this student like your relationship, your work together? Where do you think they really want things to be? What are they hoping for? What do you imagine inside their heart? And the third question, what might they say? What do they imagine might be getting in the way for this student and you to be where the student wants things to be? So go ahead and take a moment and review both sets of your answers, kind of do a bit of an inventory from both perspectives. And I'm going to share a little bit about the spirit of motivational interviewing, which is our belief system in motivational interviewing, and how we hope to come to the conversation. And think about these 4 areas, and I'll have a couple of additional questions for you to reflect on. So the first part of the spirit is compassion, which we consider to be this active promotion of the other person's welfare and needs, that the conversation, the work is for the student's benefit, in service of them. Acceptance, the second part of the spirit, that we are perspective detectives. We are seeking to understand the student's inner perspective, hopes, dreams, and goals, that we look at the student with a strengths lens, with the belief that they are an amazing human as they are, and that they have the right and responsibility to choose their own life and path. We have partnership. Partnership is this, we have 2 experts in the conversation. You may have some stuff to offer as a service provider, some resources and ideas and life experience, and the student is the expert on their own life path, journey, hopes, dreams, goals, etc. So our conversation is a with and for, and not an on and to. We're not going to do am I to anyone. That'd be kind of weird. So the last part of the spirit is evocation. It's the belief that everything's inside that student, and our role is to draw it out, to bring it forward into the light for both of you to co-create the conversation and the work together. So when you think about these 4 parts of the spirit, I'd like you to consider these 2 final questions in reflection. What, if anything, do these 4 areas, these 4 parts of the spirit, is there something here that tells you, that gives you an idea or inspiration of what might need to happen for the relationship to change? And if you were to try one new approach, one thing that you imagine might make a difference potentially in both of you reaching your goals together for your relationship, what might that be? What's the one thing? One thing you could try. So always curious to think about, what did you notice in that activity and doing that? I find that the answers are typically within myself when I'm guided by the spirit. So it's sort of that heart set, mindset reset that I often try to do. So this is my way, instead of a case consultation, no one's a case. I guess that's what we call the thing we do when we talk about a student with another person often. So I can consult with the spirit within myself. So another skill that can affect motivation to engage with us and to act on any information we might offer is how we share information. The MI spirit, or our belief system, informs what we do in the conversation, including when, how, and if we share information. So remember, MI is about evoking the student perspective. So in thinking about exchanging information, and again, these activity guides are also going to be provided to you, think about, we all got information and advice to offer. So these consistent assumptions and practices are from the 3rd edition of Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change, the sort of the book by Bill Miller and Steve Rolnick. It's things like, I have some expertise, the student is the expert on themselves, that my role is to find out what information students want and need, and that I match information to students' needs and strengths. Students can tell me what kind of information is helpful, and that advice that champions their needs can be the most helpful thing. So there's a strategy that you could practice, and it's a bit of a sandwich. So especially if there's something like we can't provide, or we want to find out what the information gaps are. It's not the information that's the most important thing. It's what the student makes of it and if and how it fits for them. So the first part is asking for the student's knowledge and understanding. So, what do you already know about what we've got to offer? Or would you like to hear about some services that we offer? In the middle, we provide the little bits without a bunch of, professional speak. And then the final part is asking for the student's response, reactions, and impressions. What do you make of this? How does it fit for you, if at all? What thoughts do you have about it? So work in the information is the more important part. And the very final skill that I'll offer today for your consideration working with students that I've found perhaps the most valuable is using autonomy supportive language. It's not enough for us to believe in the student's autonomy. These are explicit statements that the choice and the decision is theirs to make. It could sound like, I encourage you to use our support to help you think about your options. However, it is up to you to decide how to proceed with employment, or if you want to work with me. We honor the student's right and responsibility to choose their own path. It was never ours in the first place. We need them to know that we know that in service of the relationship. So this reduces reactance and supports engagement. It also opens the door for them to share who they are inside, what they think and believe, and supports both self-efficacy and self-determination. So it's like the magic fairy dust with rainbows and unicorns, emphasizing autonomy. I encourage y'all to give it a go. So this has been a lot to take in on this session, and this year and last year, perhaps like no others, we have faced challenges with engagement. I encourage you to take a pause, to breathe and create space for yourself and your students, to keep that mind open, breathing, and your heart open to the possibilities together. There is a relationship with burnout and emotional exhaustion and challenges with empathy. So consider empathy as the action, the thing we do to share compassion with ourselves and others. Empathy fuels connection and promotes healing and growth in our helping role. So as a final thing, I'd love for folks to share a learning plan of any kind. Is there a one thing from our time together today that you might try or experiment with that you might believe would have the most difference as you engage with your students or other humans that you engage with next? So what's one thing? Love folks to post that in the chat. What's your one thing that you plan to do, try, or experiment with? What's next for you? What's your one thing? And I have deep gratitude to everyone for your contributions to today's session, especially Becky for being my role play demo buddy, and for being vulnerable and courageous with us, and to your technical assistance provider crew for inviting and guiding the process and hosting us. I hope your participation in today's session was a useful pause along your journey and to shared outcomes with students, and perhaps offered an opportunity to explore your own and others' perspectives a little bit together. So I have shared the activity guides and the slides for today's session. So if you want to revisit some bits that you might like to along your learning journey, I also included a few links to other resources you might find interesting for learning forward or revisiting some of what we shared today. And I encourage you to continue to connect with your learning communities to grow your curiosity and practice together so we can all be perspective detectives.
Thank you, Heather. That was really great. And it did bring it all together. Your perspective is so wonderful. And yeah, just putting ourselves into the listening mode is really important. So thank you so much for what you did, and all the worksheets and all of that will be posted on the YTP website next week with all the materials. So thank you again. That was really amazing.
Heather, this is Charlotte. Thank you so much for being here. You barely skimmed motivational interviewing. If some of our attendees, transition specialists, VR counselors want to learn more, what are some of the opportunities that they have either formally or informally? I know you gave some resources there, but I know you've traditionally done a lot of trainings around the state. Are there additional trainings available? And how can we connect with you to get motivational interviewing at a deeper level?
Oh, you're muted, Heather.
You're muted, Heather.
Sorry, did that work?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what happened there. I think I got too excited with the button. So the final slide does have links to some different like on-demand trainings that are available. There's also a whole wide array of things available through the MI for Schools learning groups that are posted. There's a Facebook group that often posts things. There's tons of stuff out there. So I did post a few places that folks might start to go. And I hope that there are some learning communities that might take advantage of some of the activities to also play around with together. Looks like that there's some other trainings planned. So those are some ideas, and other folks may have better ones.
Thank you again. So we are going to wrap up. Charlotte, it's you're on for a wrap up.
All right, thanks, Terry. And again, thank you, Heather, and to our ICAP speakers who I think are already off. I can't see the whole list. So, guys, we started yesterday by sharing with you some of the broader context of VR and YTP within that VR structure and how the changes within that system may affect YTP in ways that we know and ways that we don't know. And then we moved into talking more specifically about the pre-ETS, the pre-employment transition services and their importance to YTP and for students launching into their career. Today, we extended that pre-employment transition conversation into learning about the ICAP program and exploring secondary, post-secondary options for students and recognizing that high school shouldn't be the end and college, a four-year degree, doesn't have to be available for every student. There are a lot, not available, but we don't have to plug students into a four-year college program. There are options in between those two extremes. And then really part of the takeaway for me with the ICAP is there are things that we can start to do now as part of those pre-employment transition services to prepare students for that transition, being mindful about the differences between 504 and ADA services in a college or post-secondary education setting versus what's required under IDEA, and helping students become self-determined and self-advocates for that. And then Heather reminds us in motivational interviewing that it really is about connecting with students. And for a transition specialist, sometimes you may be that student's person. Maybe that's the VR counselor who wears that external hat and sees that student in that fresh light. And being empathetic with that student, intentional and curious, helps us then to bring that student out and bring them into the positive light and let them see what it is they want to do, and that our job is really to facilitate that. It isn't about, as Heather so eloquently said, doing to them. It's helping them do what it is they want to do. I would really encourage you to go back and listen to this session on motivational interviewing and the spirit around compassion, acceptance, partnership, and evocation, because it really is extremely powerful. It isn't something that one takes in one, short 45-minute, hour, 2-hour setting. It takes some time to own that and reflect on how you reflect that in your positions. And we think you do. And we know that without you, students would not be as successful as they are, as you are their people in sometimes. So with that, thank you all for being here as part of our Summer Academy. Please continue to reach out to your TAPs and to Michelle as we move forward into summer activities and already preparing for next fall. And remember to take some time for yourselves, care for yourselves, because without caring for yourselves, you're not going to be able to care for others. And lastly, I would ask that you take 5 minutes to fill out the evaluation form for our Summer Academy program. That is always something that we take a look at. We do take your comments and considerations seriously, and look at how we can improve what it is that we're doing and support you in what it is that you are doing. So again, thank you all for being here, and we look forward to connecting with you down the road.
Great.
Thank you.
Anything else for the greater good, guys?
Joyce has a hand raised.
I was just asked to do a quick shout out to say congratulations to Anita from Three Rivers. She's going to be retiring in August. So to say thank you for everything you've done for YTP.
Oh, Anita, you're going to be missed.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
How wonderful.
Yes.
Congratulations. I want to take a quick moment just to plug and remind everybody that we are meeting next week on Monday at 2 o'clock for our statewide community of practice for anybody that wants to join.
All right.
Thank
you.
Watch for some spending guidance to come out soon from me around spending down underspent dollars. Watch your emails for that.
Oh boy.
Fun stuff. I know.
I know.
Very good, Michelle. I got some plans.
Bet you do.